I'll do my very best. Thank you. Thank you, Janet. So, as we all know, lithic raw material analysis provides geological and geographical information revealing spatial relations between archaeological sites and source areas. They are an essential component for gaining a better understanding of Upper Paleolithic hunter-gatherer societies, as they can contribute to broader insights into economic, behavioral, and environmental contexts and provide indications on land use patterns, subsistence strategies, and exchange networks, and are therefore a well-suited proxy for the assessment of mobility. Here we focus on long-distance imports of Cretaceous flint in two Upper Paleolithic hotspots located at the western fringes of and in the Eastern Carpathians. In the latter, the cluster of Upper Paleolithic sites in the Ciornei area of the Bistrița Valley in Romania allow for high-resolution diachronic investigations of long-distance lithic raw material procurement throughout a long and dense sequence of short-term and seasonal Gravettian to Swiderian hunter-gatherer occupations between 30 and 13 Ka. All lithic assemblages show a component of Cretaceous flint, however, of varying portion and composition. The nearest source for flint from both primary and secondary sources is the Middle Prut area, located almost 150 kilometers to the northeast, while other potential sources in the Middle Dniester catchment are located more than 200 kilometers away. Selected sites of the Austrian Middle Danube region occupied during the Gravettian and the last glacial maximum, covering a time span of roughly 34 to 22 Ka, provide a second case. The sites in the Danube Valley are located more than 200 kilometers from the closest source areas of erratic flint to the north. After a careful selection of representative sample groups from controlled archaeological contexts, the lithic artifacts from the assemblages are classified according to their reduction stages. Natural surface remains, for instance, show whether they originate from river gravels or from primary deposits. Next is a petrographic characterization of the flint types, as well as geochemical trace element analysis using laser ablation ICP-MS of selected pieces from the resulting microscopic groups, with subsequent compositional data analysis for optimal group assignment and source separation. A complementary task involves prospection for and collection of representative geological samples of Cretaceous flint from primary and secondary sources and their according petrographic and geochemical analysis. Only then can the results of geological samples be compared with the archaeological data sets and eventually diachronic and functional raw material procurement reconstructed. The resulting models can be combined with other economic aspects, such as subsistence and environmental proxies, to create a comprehensive model of diachronic mobility patterns. Our key site in the Eastern Carpathians is Bistrița Lutaria 3. Mircea already introduced it, I suppose, yesterday or this morning. Today, okay? 2 hours ago, as it provides a long sequence of stratigraphically and chronologically controlled contexts. Other sites, such as BL1 and Bistrița La Mal, provide a better resolution for certain time periods, and the Swiderian site Ciornei La Scaune extends the sequence to the Pleistocene-Holocene boundary. We should mention that we also work at sites with comparable chronologies on the Siret and Prut rivers, such as Dolhasca and Cotomiculins. This enables us to gain a broader picture across a wider area and to trace the transport of flint into the Bistrița Valley. It is noticeable that Cretaceous flint dominates the inventories of most sites, not only near the sources at the Prut and Dniester rivers, but also at sites between these rivers and the Carpathians. In October 2021, we conducted a flint sourcing survey along the Middle Prut Valley. The major objective was to sample the primary and secondary deposits for complementary petrographic and geochemical analysis. Most of the visited locations exposed different parts of the geological succession. The correlation of the lithostratigraphic observations made at different localities provided the necessary insight for understanding the Proot flint occurrence. Field observation and macroscopic analysis allowed differentiating several varieties of Proot flint, which follow the vertical distribution in the stratigraphic sequence. Neither the high variability nor the petrostratigraphy has so far been reported by previous research. A clear trend is that the flint gets lighter in color when moving up the sequence. The conglomerate atop breaks this rule and shows a higher variability as it contains all types. The same flint varieties were identified on the Miocene and Pleistocene terraces as well as in the Holocene gravel bars. Despite the good to excellent napping quality of Proot flint, our field observations suggest notable differences in napping quality between the flint from the chalk, the decalcified clay, and the gravels. The gravels often bear the material of highest quality. This is probably why it was preferably used in the Upper Paleolithic. Our preliminary geochemical results demonstrate the potential to identify individual depositional sequences in the Proot flint deposits by using different trace elements such as rubidium, titanium, vanadium, lithium, or potassium. On the left here, you can see a raw data plot of trace elements magnesium versus vanadium of 3 Proot flint types from primary sources. To the right, we compare the same 3 Proot flint types to artifacts from archaeological sites of the Chaplau Basin in blue and specimens from Rivne, Ukraine, which have been sourced to local sources of so-called Volhynian flint in yellow by plotting lithium against vanadium. This suggests that flint from Dniester Volhynian sources and not Proot flint was in fact the most abundant flint type used in the Chaplau area. It is noticeable that the earliest occupations, namely horizon 2.5 at Bistricuara Lutaria 3, demonstrates the most pronounced dominance of Dniester Volhynian flint, which derives from farthest sources. The horizon above 2.4 shows a dominant of Proot Dniester flint, and the later contexts where local raw materials dominate include varying but much smaller portions of both types. In the Middle Danube region, we look at 3 Upper Paleolithic sites, Gösing-Setzergraben and Kremswachtberg, attributed to the earlier Gravettian, Pavlovian, and Kammern-Grubgraben, dating to the time frame of the LGM. All 3 sites have erratic flint in their lithic inventories. On the map, the southernmost occurrence of erratic flint is indicated as a black line at a distance of more than 200 kilometers from the sites. Gösing-Setzergraben was excavated in 2014 after having been hit by a mechanical excavator which destroyed the greater part of the site. We determined 4 archaeological horizons, of which the uppermost is the most distinct and includes a multi-phased hearth. Charcoal dates place it in Greenland Stadial 5.2 and a floating dendro curve connects it to Kremswachtberg. Occupation horizon 4.4. 4.4 at Kremswachtberg has burials and pits as well as a hearth very similar to the one found at Gösing. Radiocarbon dates and Löss Paleosoil stratigraphy also place it into GS 5.2. Both sites show Pavlovian characteristics, as we all know, with regard to economic factors as well as technological and typological traits. The third site, Kammern-Grubgraben, dates to the LGM, and this site was already introduced by my colleague Hannah. At Gösing, almost all determinable artifacts were identified as erratic flint. For the Gravettian in the Austrian Danube region, this documented a primarily import-based raw material economy for the very first time. However, this is not unusual for other Pavlovian sites. What is interesting is that it contrasts sharply with the contemporaneous assemblages of Krems-Wachtberg. Krems-Wachtberg Horizon 4.4 shows mainly local raw materials, setting it in clear contrast to other Pavlovian inventories where erratic flint dominates. The sparse erratic flint inventory of only 96 artifacts is composed mainly of blades and bladelets. There are no cores. About 1/4 of the artifacts show modifications and with a high portion of armatures, such as back bladelets and microcrevettes. However, the overall inventory also shows that all armature types were also made of lower quality local material. So there are different scenarios to explain the diametrically different distribution of raw materials at the two sites. Assuming that sites with high proportions of erratic flint, such as Dolní Věstonice, Pavlov, Jarošov, or Předmost, and Gösing-Setzergraben represent a Pavlovian standard, Gösing would be a first station of a group arriving from the northeast. Supply with exotic raw material is most probably connected to macro moves, meaning a relocation of the main camp. Micro moves from the main camps provide local raw materials. The overall uniform typological spectrum at Gösing focused on a standardized production of armatures with relatively few domestic tools, may therefore indicate a relatively short duration of occupation. In a first model, we can assume that Krems-Wachtberg Horizon 4.4 was probably occupied towards the end of a seasonal mobility cycle. We can assume that groups coming from the northeast are supplied with high-quality raw material at the beginning of their presence in the Danube region. As the duration of occupation increases, the proportion of erratic flint decreases and is replaced by local raw materials, which may not have the same quality but are nonetheless sufficient to maintain the overall techno system. The supply with erratic flint is thus not a primary element affecting the duration of occupation. Subsequent macro moves to the northeast would then restore access to erratic flint. A second possibility assumes that all Pavlovian sites should be supplied by high amounts of erratic flint, corresponding to Kuhn's concept of provisioning of places. Raw material provisioning of Krems-Wachtberg does therefore not correspond to this regular system or pattern. The small portion of erratic flint at Wachtberg, in contrast, supports a model of individual provisioning in the sense of raw material transport as part of personal gear. Krems-Wachtberg's disconnection from the raw material supply system could be related to an unplanned extended stay in the Danube Valley. The diversity of the typological spectrum compared to Gösing suggests a broader variety of activities and consequently a comparatively longer occupation. Could this be connected to the 3 infant graves? We don't know. This model suggests the dynamic character of the raw material economy and a high degree of adaptability of Pavlovian communities. At the LGM site Kammern-Grubgraben, erratic flint also appears as predominantly used material. Other far-distance materials, such as Carpathian radiolorite and Krakow flint, underline connections to the northeast. In contrast to Gösing, however, regional and local raw materials are represented in the inventory. Other LGM sites in the region show a heterogeneous picture. Low amounts of erratic flint are documented at Shagwa, Kashov, Upper Layer, and Stranska Skala 4, while Langmannersdorf, Saladorf, and Rosenburg use mostly local or regional materials, whereby erratic flint is practically absent. At Mohelno Plevoce, as we have heard, erratic flint predominates at stone structure KSA, while local raw materials prevail in the other structures. The non-uniform, patchy overall picture regarding the use of erratic flint correlates to some extent to the technological and typological diversity of the lithic LGM inventories in Central Europe. In comparison to the earlier Gravettian, it appears that a mosaic of sites with very specific behaviors and economies seems to emerge. The raw material procurement strategies continue to show a high degree of mobility, but point to potentially differing responses to the environment. Although not represented at all sites and layers, high-quality silicious raw materials, albeit in varying portions, seem to remain in high demand throughout the Upper Paleolithic time spans covered in the two find regions. Mobility ranges are similar in both regions, and the directions of the macro moves bear a peculiar resemblance. Not only do they run south-north or southwest-northeast, but we also observe that the movements do not run parallel, but rather perpendicular to the major rivers. East of the Carpathians, raw material transport runs across the large rivers, Dniester, Prut, Siret, Bistrica, and towards the Carpathians. In the western part of the study area, the principal transport direction runs from or through the Moravian Gate towards the Danube, and in both cases across a time span of more than 10,000 years. Assuming that raw material procurement is embedded in hunter-gatherer subsistence strategies, it seems plausible that these mobility patterns reflect the group's macro moves. The movement directions perpendicular to major geographic features provided access to a higher diversity of habitat types within given mobility ranges than movements along rivers and mountain ranges where the environmental setting remains widely similar over larger distances. In the eastern area of our investigations, we assume seasonal macro moves from the mountainous Chaflot Basin to the steppes and or tundra steppes in the northeast in late spring, early summer, taking into account a high degree of continentality. Moisture availability in the steppic areas would then be highest. The macro move connected to flint provisioning could have taken place in late summer, early autumn, when the steppic areas became too dry and the more structured environments of the submountainous and mountainous areas provided, together with higher moisture availability due to higher precipitation rates, a more reliable basis for subsistence. A similar pattern can be assumed for the Middle Danube region, where macro moves to and from the tundra in the north probably showed a similar seasonality. Noticeable is also the direction of transport of some other raw materials, such as Carpathian radiolorite in the west and Toplica chert in the east, which both also run perpendicular to main geographic features, or the presence of so-called Volhynian flint at sites in Slovakia and Hungary. We regard the directions of the macro moves chosen by the hunter-gatherer groups as responses to heterogeneous regional and seasonal distribution of resources, and thus as a strategy for optimizing access. Decreased supply of high-quality flint may be connected to either changing migratory patterns of the prey or human choice regarding subsistence strategies. Under changing environmental conditions, predictability of resources and therefore risk assessment probably became more challenging. We are far from understanding Upper Paleolithic risk management, but tracing raw material procurement will certainly remain a decisive tool in this endeavor. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Marc. So we have still time, so if there's some questions about the raw material movements, the Paleolithic phases. Yeah.
Marc, thank you very much for the presentation. Maybe, if I understand well, you noted the Jurassic rim from Poland in Austria. Preparation of formation. I'm a little bit missing this source in your lab because there is only the belt, yeah. But it respects the same direction, of course. Maybe if you speak about the movement to the large distance, maybe it's interesting to know that it looks at nodules from Jurassic flint was transported in the form, in original form, with the original cortex. Maybe for a very fast, for a long distance, because in those distances, for example, you can find many frames with the cortex from this flint, with contrary to the flint from Jurassic flint, because this material is so solid. Usually, if you try to net it, first you broke it according to first fraction, and maybe it was the reason why people transport rather free form of cores, something like this, because it was more economic to do this. And maybe it's also an interesting feature when we think about the movement into the large distance. Because of course, maybe colleagues excavate the site in Pavlov and those distance can say something to this. But for me, it looks that there is a little bit different how the material was transported, and there is some evidence that sometimes this transport could be very fast. Because normally we think that, okay, they take the piece and move from place to place, but maybe sometimes they transport it for long distance from one side to the second side to have an origin bottom of the material.
I mean, this is very well, thank you very much for this comment. This is very well possible. There are also a range of other raw materials I didn't even mention now that indicate even longer distances of transport. Yeah, for example, so-called Balkan flint in the East Carpathian sites, or obsidian, which we also find in the East Carpathian sites. And it is always possible that smaller quantities, I would say, travel faster. But I think the transport of larger quantities that provide the bulk of the material that was used, they cannot be transported quickly by a small group. I think they came with what I call like a major move, and they came with the entire group. This is what we propose in this presentation.
If I may just add a few details. So I also have the same idea. The amount of the raw materials, because the diversity of the raw materials actually larger, and we do have small amounts of exotic raw materials coming also from different direction, but at least for this Eastern Carpathian site, it's a matter of amounts. For instance, the fruit flint and the Vietnam, especially, was really brought in large amounts, and as you suggested, and we also have an explanation already, Mark suggested that, as full blocks of nodules, but pebbles, actually river pebbles. And the reason is that the river does a job for you, so you don't have to clean it, because what you have left is a high quality flint, and the flint we have in the Carpathian, for instance, on the Bicitra, is basically all suggest that it was brought us, with context of full nodules, big enough, I would say, because you have a really big place, so I expect that the original core was quite big. But we haven't up to this yet waited to see exactly what the weight of this.
And it's the same at Gösing. It's the same at Gösing. It was also brought in as complete nodules. Only the Bachberg material, that's a bit peculiar. Jerzy? Yeah.
When you talk about methods of material and rivers, just an idea, it's not group for it, but do you think of using some kind of a boat? This would be slow because the river was meandering, but it would save much labor.
It would save a lot, especially when going downstream, of course. That's absolutely, yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right, yeah.
And maybe in the same direction, and talking about direction, so all the transport was directed from north to south. And the question is, so is there any evidence for long-term transport from south to north? And if not, do you think it's yearly round? Does it contain only one macro move, and then the returning is done only in micro moves? And can that be related to the direction of rivers?
We have only so into the opposite directions. Yeah, the artifactual or the material support is much lower. For Romania, we do have Carpathian raw materials, but in the fruit on the fruit sides, but very small quantities. On the other hand, it may just be a coincidence, but the flint it's a high quality material that's worth taking. Yeah, in contrast to materials from the Carpathians or from the Danube gravel.
Yeah, and the same situation is in Poland. Yeah, where we have the excellent Jurassic flint there in the Krakow area, and we have just a single piece of the obsidian, like a 5 size from the southern, but it's just a single pieces among the thousands of the lithic. But yeah, we have the raw material like in the northern part in your origin, so it's there's not necessary to transport, but they transport. Yeah, we have sugar points made from the last 10 side or meteorite, so yeah, they transport something, but it's low amount, just single pieces. So.
Yeah. I mean, they could have transported something else. This would be the question. What did they take instead?
I'm sure from the system we have the back made from the muscles of the Mediterranean region, nice one piece similar. We are sure it's from the Mediterranean. It's not a fossil, so probably there was some exchange from long term. Yeah, but good question.
This is a spectrum that we have seen before. It came from the sea, or is it possible?
Which one?
The spectrum mollusk that has to come from some.
Yeah. No. These mollusks from Flensbachberg, Veronica, if I may answer it quickly. So there were mollusks. The Theodoxus, they were of course contemporaneous to the site occupation. They are from the they are from the local rivers. They could live they could have lived in the Danube, and the other pieces are fossils from tertiary context, Badinian usually.